Okay, let's go into the bone tissue. These are not all the bones. This is a bone tissue overview. So it has its own section in your lab notes and everything. When we look at the bone tissue, we're talking about a tissue, which is a collection of different types of cells. Okay. What type of tissue would bone tissue be in? I keep stressing tissue. It's connective, exactly. So when we looked at, I don't know what exercise number it is in the lab. If you see bones, it's the very first thing that shows bones. Yep, that's it. Yep. Okay, so we're going to look at the primary characteristics of the skeletal system and of the bone tissue itself. First thing you want to think is support. It supports the organs, like when you talk about the rib cage, it's protecting the heart and the lungs. When you're talking about the hips, it gives us protective function, not just for supporting the legs, but also protecting the organs that are inside that area, like the reproductive organs. When you look at the skull, obviously, what's it protecting? Yep, how about the vertebra? The spinal cord, yeah. The spinal cord. So support and protection, it gives you stability. When we start talking about things like joints and the way that they're formed, you'll see support and stability. The ones that have more stability, they have less movement. The ones that are more movable, what do you know about their support? They probably have less support. So what do you think dislocates more often? A hip or a shoulder? A shoulder, yeah, until you get older, and then it's usually the bones that are breaking in the hip. But we'll talk about that. It's there to help with movement, not to do the actual moving, but to give you a scaffolding to move. So it gives you levers so you can move around. What does the actual moving? Muscles, right? Muscles do the contraction. This is a skeleton just like yours. It can't move without muscles. It's fixed in that place. It's kind of like when you go to a chiropractor. I've always been puzzled. Chiropractors, when they set you, what are they moving? They're moving bones, right? They're shifting bones. But what's holding from moving the bones in the first place? Muscle. So if they don't fix the muscle too, then what's going to happen to you? Go back again, yeah. So it's kind of I always thought that massage therapists or physical therapists should always work with chiropractors because the chiropractor sets the bone and the massage therapist would do what? Reset the muscle. Yeah. So anyway, movement, we're talking about the lever part. And when you think about the actual moving, I think muscles. Next, this one a lot of people forget about. Raw material reservoirs, so storage places. The primary storage you want to think about would be, what do we drink or eat to make these strong? Calcium. Yeah. You want to think of things like calcium and phosphate, which are minerals. Inside the bone, you have storage of the fat. And this last one's a really important one too. Hematopoiesis means making of blood cells. Not just red blood cells, but white blood cells too. This is where they're made. They're made in the bones themselves. So when you make red blood cells or white blood cells, they're made in the bones. That's hematopoiesis. Right. When we talk about the bone sections, we'll talk about the axial skeleton and the appendicular. The axial skeleton, if I held this guy right here from the middle and I pivoted him, he pivots on an axis. All these bones going straight down the middle, those are axial skeleton. The appendages are the things that are added on to your core. Arms and legs, those are the appendages. So appendicular skeleton revolves around the arms and the legs. Axial skeleton is right down the core. So we're talking skull, vertebra, thoracic cage. Those are axial. When you talk about the arms and the shoulder, the legs and the hips, those are appendicular. And we have 206 bones to go through, but not today. The benefit is of those 206 bones, most of them are paired. You get one on one side, you get another one on the other. Even up in the skull, a lot of those are paired. You have one up here, one over here. So in reality, there are a little over 100 bone names. Most of them, yes. Okay, so how do you classify bone? We've talked about the subdivisions of the skeletal system, but now classifying bones. First category is a long bone. The way you describe it is it's longer than it is wide. Long bone. Places like the legs and the arms, you're going to see tons of long bones. So longer than it is wide. When you look at short bones, they're typically cube-shaped, so they're about as high as they are wide. So long bones versus short bones. Long bones are longer than they are wide. Short bones are roughly cubed, so they're about the same width as they are height. The next category is called a flat bone, and those are flat. So when you look at things like the ribs, they're flat. They're kind of bent around, but they're flat bones. When you look at the skull, like this guy, we can pluck his head right off. You can see they're flat bones. And then the last category is called irregulars, which means they're weird shaped. And this irregular bone, I swear this is like a Rorschach test. This is evolution's way of doing a Rorschach test for flying. What's it look like? How many people see a butterfly? How many people see a bat? Yeah. So some people describe it as looking like a bat, some as a butterfly, but it's really irregular. It's not like one solid bone. It's weird, bent all over the place shape. It's irregular. There's one other special type of irregular that we call a sesamoid bone, which means it looks like a sesame seed, and that's in your kneecap. So patella. They can't put his leg up that high. But it's supposed to look like a giant sesame seed, and we call it sesamoid. It's still considered an irregular bone. Okay, so the major types. Flat bones are typically flat. Long bones are what? Longer than they are wide. And then the ones that are short are usually cube-shaped. So what about your fingers? What would these be? If you had to describe that.
Long.
Why long? It's longer than it is wide. Yeah, how about the wrist bones here? They're short because they're kind of cube-shaped. What would you call this? It's not a very funny bone. Humorous, it's a long bone. Okay, so now you need to know about the long bone structure. When you slice a long bone open, slice all the way down, the different structures that you want to identify first are the physes. So you have the diaphysis, which is the shaft. It goes from here all the way down through. It's a long, round section. The next one is the epiphysis, which is all the way at the very ends. So epi, remember, at the very top or superficial. The very ends of these are called epiphysis. So epiphysis and diaphysis. And I think your book refers to the metaphysis, which is right in here. But I'm really concerned with you knowing epi versus the diaphysis. So if I ask what the diaphysis is, what are you looking for? What would be the layperson's term for that? The shaft. And then epiphysis are the ends. When you look and you slice across the diaphysis, you can actually see there's a really thick layer here, a really hard white layer. It's like a collar. It's made of something called compact bone. It's very, very dense. If you look in, you start moving in, you can see this spongy stuff, which we actually call spongy bone. So compact and then becomes slightly spongy right along here, and then down through the core, I'm referring to it as a hollow center, but it's not actually filled with air, it's filled with other stuff. So it has this hollow center in the middle that we call the medulla. What did medulla mean? Middle. Yep. So the cortex would be the outer part, which is compact bone. Spongy bone would be underneath the compact bone, and then the medullary area, or the medulla, is the central cavity. And we fill that with bone marrow. And we'll talk about the different types of bone marrow. That's also where blood cells are made. Oops, I forgot to point out one thing. At the very end down here in the epiphysis, this is in the leg. So what do you think is going to happen right here? Where's that structure that we call right at the very end? The joint. Yep, so you have the knee joint here. You have this special cartilage. What cartilage did I tell you is always at joints? Hyaline cartilage. Yep. Referred to as articular cartilage or hyaline cartilage. Remember, hyaline was the glassy looking stuff. It's real smooth and it allows for practically frictionless movement. Practically. And this is a picture out of your text. I think this is the same picture that's in your lab manual too, but you see the different areas. If we look at the compact bone, it's really dense. We can actually zoom in and you can see how dense it is. Here's a spongy area that looks like a sponge, but it's really hard. And then the medullary cavity. This is yellow bone marrow, which is actually fat. Red bone marrow is where you have that hematopoiesis, which is making red blood cells, white blood cells too. Okay, when you're looking at the structures on the very outside, you have this protective covering on a bone, this connective tissue. You can see it's kind of flexible, it's peeled. It's called periosteum. When I see peri, I always think the perimeter of something, so it means around the outside of something. So peri means around the outside. What's osteo? osteum inside the bone. So periosteum is that protective covering on the outside of the bone. It helps hold or glue things down, like blood vessels. Your bone's living tissue is constantly changing. We refer to it as being dynamic. It fixes itself. It repairs weak areas. It breaks down areas that get old and repair it. You have to have blood vessels going in there because it's constantly changing. This periosteum secures the blood vessels in a place so they don't rip and tear. So it's a dense, irregular tissue that's wrapping all the way around the outside. It's strong and holds the stuff in place. Later when we talk about other structures, like we'll talk about the tendons. Tendons connect muscles to bone. This periosteum continuously goes right into the tendon that holds the muscle onto the bone to help glue it on. All right, has lots of blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, which carry immune structures. And then where the blood vessel goes in is called the nutrient foramen. When you see this word foramen, Wednesday we'll start talking about these types of words, but foramen means a big hole. So it's a hole where nutrients come in to supply the bone. Going to the nutrient foramen. Okay, next one, end osteum. So what would endo mean? Within. I think we covered that before when we were talking about exocytosis and endocytosis. End osteo or endo-osteum would be within the bone. So it's on the inside layer of the bone. If I had a layer on the outside, which was periosteum, now I have to look all the way through the connective tissue, all the way through the dense compact bone, and on the very inside, like the medullary cavity, I would see this end osteum. So lining the hollow core of the bone is the inner layer of the end osteum. And we're going to find there's special cells in the end osteum that help build the bone. Okay, next one. Oops, did I skip a slide? Nope. Those are the major parts of the long bone. Now the structure of the short, irregular, and flat bones. They look very similar because they have a compact bone on the outside. They have spongy bone too, but they're completely missing the cavity, which makes them very distinctive. So the short, irregular, and flat bones don't have a medullary cavity. They have spongy, they have compact, but they're missing that medullary. They can still, is this one missing? Oh, it's missing the medullary cavity, the hollow core. Sorry, I thought you said it was missing from the slides. So I always think of it as being like a sandwich. You have a hard surface on one side, hard surface on the other side, and it's just filled with spongy stuff on the other side. Spongy sandwich. And that spongy stuff is called diplo. You can still have bone marrow in here, there's just no medullary cavity for it to be stored in. So you can still have red bone marrow to make blood cells. You can still have yellow bone marrow to store fat. There's just no cavity for the marrow. Sometimes that can be tricky, so there's no stress in it. Right. So that's the distinction between the structure of long bone and short bone. What do you call the ends of the long bones that we didn't see with short bones, irregular? This is like a Flintstone bone I'm drawing here. But yep, this is called the epiphysis, and this part, which is the shaft, is called the diaphysis. You don't see those on the irregular bones, short bones, and long bones. You also don't see this hollow core that goes down the middle, which is called the what? Medullary cavity, right? So those are some of the things you look for. I'm big on saving brain space. I hate wasting brain. But, so I always look for the things that are the exceptions. Well, what makes this kind of bone unique? This bone's unique because it's longer than it is wide. It has an epiphysis, a diaphysis, and a medullary cavity. Those are the first things that always pop out when I look at long bones. So can I see a medullary cavity? It has to be a long bone. Do I see an epiphysis and diaphysis? It has to be a long bone. Okay, bone structure. This is kind of cool. The bone matrix, when we talk about matrix with connective tissue, that was going to be my question, where do you see matrix connective tissue? But it's that jello-like stuff. The matrix, remember, is all that substance that holds everything together. With bone structure, it's not like epithelium where it's one after another, after another, after another cell. It's connective tissue. So you have these scattered cells all over the place. But the matrix is just a filling. When you look at what's in the matrix, you have about a third is organic and 2/3 are inorganic. Organic means it's living cells. It's living tissue. It's alive because you made this stuff out of living tissue. The 2/3 inorganic means it's minerals, primarily. Calcium, phosphate, magnesium. It's the dead stuff. It's rocks. So the organic means it's been alive, and the inorganic means it's typically made out of minerals. It's inorganic. I always look at this bone structure as being kind of like, the driveway to my house. I think I kind of mentioned this. So when I went to Iowa State, I watched the Pasta Gorilla factory go up, and they built this tall structure. And they had all this wiring. It looked like wiring. It was actually steel bars going all over the place. And then what they did is after they had the steel bar structure formed, then they poured concrete up. So they formed this big concrete building that was all poured. It's one of the largest poured concrete buildings in the United States. Your bone is exactly the same way. You have this inorganic stuff that makes kind of these spirals made out of collagen. These are organic. It's a structure. You have the cells that are forming it. Those are organic. And it forms this crisscross pattern to give you strength so that you can bend a little bit. Then what it does is it pours the inorganic, and we call it calcium, phosphate, or hydroxyapatite. And I think I have this highlighted on the next slide. That's the inorganic. They pour this over. So inorganic is poured over. And it gives it a lot of strength. Your bones can take a little bit of bend because they have this organic collagen. It's strong, ropey steel fibers. It's like having steel cables in there holding it together. But it has a lot of impact strength because it has this inorganic stuff poured all over it. Running low on time. Oops. Make sure I cover everything there. Yep, hydroxyapatite in bold. This is kind of cool. If you take a bone and you weaken that hydroxyapatite concrete, so if I put it in vinegar, it gets demineralized. It loosens up the concrete. Now I can actually take the bone and twist it into a knot because it's just all that steel cable-like stuff left. If I take a bone and I heat it up, I cook it, I raise the temperature of the collagen, and I kill the collagen. What's left now? The concrete. If you take a chicken bone that's been cooked and you try and bend it, what's it do? Yep, it just shatters, right? That's because that concrete stuff doesn't bend very well. You kill all the collagen, all I have left is really the concrete, and it shatters. That's why you never give your dogs or cats cooked bones, because they're hard, and they break off, and then they can actually cut the inside of the dog or cat. You can give them raw ones. If you ever take a raw chicken bone, you can actually bend that thing a lot. If I take it and I put it in vinegar for a couple days, and I let it demineralize all of that concrete, all that's left is strong collagen. I can actually wrap it in another. So which one is this one? Has this one been demineralized, or has it had the organic collagen removed? It's been demineralized. Yeah, I broke the concrete apart. When you look at the types of cells, we've got like 6 minutes to talk about these cells, so I may just get started with them. You need to remember the names. Osteogenic. Genic, you see that in the cell name, it means to generate or stem cell. What's it a stem cell for? What's it generating? Bone. Yeah, so it's a bone stem cell. So it's osteogenic. Once the osteogenic cells, these are the baby cells. They can't do anything yet. All they can do is they grow. So they start growing, you find them close to blood vessels, need lots of nutrients to grow. When they're ready to start working, they become an osteoblast. What is blast? Maker. Now they're actually building it. My analogy for this is, I always think of masons, the people that make brick buildings. So when they're kids, they're learning their trade. They're not doing anything. And then when they get into their active years, they're like osteoblasts. They start building things. They're building all this concrete and brick building. These osteoblasts are laying down all the forms for your bones, hard structures. They're building the bone. Osteocytes are retired osteoblasts. When these osteoblasts form, and I talked about this last week, the tissue, they surround themselves in this little lacuna. They take care of the area around them, but they can't move anymore. So they can't build any more bone. All they can do is maintain it. They're retired. They don't make anything anymore. They just take care of it. They clean it up. They get rid of debris. They just take care of it. They're matured. When I was a teenager, I worked for a mason for one summer. And I remember when he was building everything for other people, at the same time on weekends he was building his own house to retire in. And I always thought of this. He was an osteoblast building things, but when he was ready to retire, he stayed in his little house and just took care of his house. It was already built. He didn't have to do anything else. He became an osteocyte. And then the exact opposite, something called osteoclast. Osteoclast is the destroyer of bone. You have lots of these things that are constantly breaking down your bones. To me, they look like scrubbing bubbles. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? They clean your bathroom, they clean the crap off the walls. If you look, here are osteoblasts, they're little tiny guys. Here is an osteocyte. They're huge because they actually have up to 50 other cells inside of them. These are actually phagocytes. Do you remember what phagocyte meant? Cells that eat other things, right? So these phagocytes, there are 50 of them that get in this little pack and they start moving. And they start eating the bone. They're destroying the bone. But the good thing is an osteoblast follows right behind them and does what? They frame new bone. Yep, so your bones are constantly being broken down by osteoclasts, but they're being rebuilt by osteoblasts. So their main goal is bone reabsorption, or resorption. They pull the nutrients out of the bone, they break the bone apart, and they dump it into the blood. So if there's a weak area of the bone, they just break the calcium down, they dump the calcium in your blood, if it's too much calcium, you urinate it out. Or you defecate it out. And then the osteoblast comes along and just rebuilds that area so it's nice and smooth and good. At the very bottom of these, they have something called ruffled borders. It's a jagged edge, and the whole significance of a ruffled border is it increases surface area. So as they're working, they release enzymes from this ruffled border, lots and lots of enzymes, so they can have massive resorption. So they break down the bone, they get down in, and they move on. And then these osteoblasts are going to do what in this area? They reconnect. It's kind of like an epithelial cell where they try and reconnect until it's one solid piece of it. So here's an osteoblast, here's an osteoclast. Here's one of those osteoblasts that's retired. It's stuck inside the bone it made. It made this bone and now it can't move. What's it called? An osteocyte, right? All right. Actually, I think we'll stop right there for today. And then by the time you come back in on Wednesday, you should have done what?